Before we begin Manhattan, mid-December. The city glittered with holiday lights as New York's wealthiest gathered for what should have been another routine evening of high-stakes art acquisition. But nothing about this night would be routine. A world apart, Cassandra. Monroe adjusted her worn leather portfolio and took a steadying breath outside. Blackwood Auction House. The building rose before her like a temple to wealth. All marble columns and brass fixtures that probably cost more than her annual income. Inside, champagne flowed freely and designer gowns rustled against tailored suits worth thousands. Cass smoothed her simple black dress, purchased 3 years ago for these occasional consulting gigs, and reminded herself why she was here. As an independent art appraiser, she'd built her reputation on one thing: honesty. Museums trusted her. Private collectors respected her work. She might not have the fancy credentials or family connections of other appraisers, but she had integrity. Tonight, she'd been hired by a private collector to evaluate several lots before they went to auction. The pay was modest. Every job mattered when you were one missed rent payment away from disaster. The man, with everything 3 rows from the front. Jonathan Westfield tried to focus on the auction catalog while his assistant, Rebecca, whispered updates about tomorrow's board meeting. At 34, John had everything most people dreamed of: billions from his tech company, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and enough influence to open almost any door in New York. What he didn't have was peace. His father had died 8 months ago, leaving John not just the family fortune, but also the Westfield Foundation, sprawling arts charity that his father had loved more than anything. The board thought John was too young, too tech-focused, too different from his traditional father. They were probably right. The landscape is coming up soon, Rebecca murmured. Lot 64, 1880s. Hudson River school piece attributed to Thomas Hill. Your father had been tracking it for years. John nodded. Buying this painting felt like honoring his father's memory, continuing his legacy. He'd already decided to bid whatever it took. The moment of truth, Cass. Had examined Lot 64 that afternoon in the auction house's viewing room. Something about the painting bothered her immediately. The brushwork looked wrong for the period. The canvas preparation didn't match documented techniques from that era. Most damning, signature showed clear signs of artificial aging. She'd reported her concerns to Blackwood's authentication department. But her report had apparently been dismissed. The painting was still in tonight's sale, carrying an estimate of $3 to $5 million. Now, as the auctioneer brought up Lot 64, Cass watched the bidding begin. $500,000 became $700,000, then quickly jumped to $1 million. She recognized several serious collectors in the room, but the most aggressive bidder was a dark-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit, who kept raising his paddle with quiet determination. Jonathan Westfield. Cass recognized him from business magazines. Tech billionaire, recently inherited the Westfield Foundation. Young, wealthy, and apparently about to make a very expensive mistake. $2 million, John called out, his voice steady. 2.5, countered an elderly woman in the front row. $3 million, John responded without hesitation. Cass felt sweat on her palms. This was spiraling out of control. The painting was worth maybe $50,000 at best, probably less. She'd submitted her authentication report. She'd done her job. But watching someone throw away millions on a fake made her physically ill? $4 million, the elderly woman said, though she looked less certain now. John raised his paddle again. $5 million. The room went quiet. $5 million for a painting that wasn't authentic. Cass's heart hammered. She'd spent her entire career building credibility. Publicly contradicting Blackwood Auction House could end her career in New York. Every major institution would blacklist her. Collectors would stop calling. But $5 million. On a fake? Going once at $5 million, the auctioneer announced. Raising his gavel, Cass stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head turned toward her. Stop, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. That painting is not authentic. The aftermath effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The auctioneer's gavel clattered to the floor. John Westfield stared at her with an expression of pure shock. I examined that piece yesterday, Cass continued, forcing her voice to stay steady despite her racing pulse. The paint composition is wrong for the 1880s period. The canvas preparation doesn't match Hill's documented methods. The signature shows artificial aging. It's a very skilled reproduction, but it's not authentic. I must ask you to sit down, the auctioneer began. His face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She's correct. A new voice joined the conversation. An elderly gentleman with white hair stood up from the back row. Dr. Philip Ashford, retired curator from the Smithsonian. I specialize in Hudson River School paintings. I examined this piece this morning and submitted my own concerns to Blackwood's management. That painting is indeed a forgery. The room erupted. Voices rose in confusion and outrage. Phones appeared as people started recording and posting to social media. Cass could see the Blackwood executives huddled near the podium, their faces pale with panic. Through the chaos, John Westfield was still staring at her. Then he did something completely unexpected. He started laughing. Not a cruel laugh, but one of genuine relief mixed with disbelief. He stood up, and in the moment before anyone could react, he said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Thank you. You just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Then, as if his brain short-circuited from stress and adrenaline, he added, "Will you have dinner with me?" The room went from chaotic to absolutely silent. Someone gasped. A phone fell to the floor with a crack. Cass felt her face burn. "You don't even know my name, Cassandra Monroe," John said immediately. "You graduated top of your class from Northwestern with degrees in art history and chemistry. You've consulted for the Art Institute of Chicago, the Getty, and the Guggenheim. You exposed a forgery ring in Miami 2 years ago. You're brilliant, principled, and you just saved me $5 million. So yes, I'd very much like to take you to dinner." Rebecca, John's assistant, made a small choking sound. Several people in the audience were openly filming now. The auctioneer looked like he might faint. "How do you know all that about me?" Cass managed to ask. John had the grace to look embarrassed. "Because I've been wanting to meet you for months. Your reputation in the art world is legendary. When I saw you were consulting tonight, I almost came over to introduce myself a dozen times, but I kept losing my nerve. So you memorized my resume instead? When you put it that way, it sounds strange. It is strange. Mr. Westfield. John, please call me John," he smiled. And despite everything, despite the chaos and the staring crowd and the absolute insanity of the situation, Cass felt herself smile back. "This is inappropriate." The head auctioneer finally recovered enough to say, "Miss Monroe, your services are no longer needed by Blackwood, Mr. Westfield. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately." But Dr. Ashford was already walking toward the podium. "Actually, I think everyone here would like to know how a forgery made it past your authentication process. Miss Monroe and I both submitted concerns that were apparently ignored. As the auction house descended into damage control and the crowd pressed forward for details, John made his way through the chaos to where Cass stood, still holding her portfolio. Still trying to process what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "just for her. That was completely inappropriate of me. You did your job brilliantly, and I just made you the center of a media circus." Cass looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine remorse mixed with something else. Admiration, maybe? Or hope? "Yes," she said. "You did make this incredibly awkward." "I know. I'm sorry, but the answer is yes. I'll have dinner with you. Somewhere private where there are no cameras and no auction houses and absolutely no public declarations." John's face lit up like she'd just given him the best news of his life. "Really?" "But John, yes. Next time you want to buy a multi-million-dollar painting, call me first." As they left the auction house together, flashbulbs popping and reporters shouting questions, Cass realized her life had just changed completely. Her phone was already buzzing with calls and texts. Some would be job offers. Others would be angry collectors and auction houses cutting ties. But walking beside John into the cold December night, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, the thrill of taking a risk that might actually be worth it. The morning after, Cass woke to her phone buzzing like an angry hornet. 43 missed calls, 87 text messages. Her email inbox showed 203 unread messages, and she'd only been asleep for 6 hours. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the chaos. Half the messages were from reporters wanting interviews. The other half were from clients and auction houses, some offering support, others coldly terminating their relationships with her. "Great," she muttered to her cat, Picasso, who was sitting on her windowsill, completely unbothered by his owner's career imploding. "I'm officially unemployed." Her tiny Chicago apartment suddenly felt even smaller. She'd moved to this studio 3 years ago when she started her independent appraisal business, telling herself it was temporary. Now, looking at the cramped space filled with art books and authentication equipment, she wondered if she'd just thrown away everything she'd worked for. Her phone rang. An unknown New York number. "Hello, Miss Monroe. This is Rebecca Chen, Mr. Westfield's assistant. Mr. Westfield would like to meet with you this morning if you're available. He's sending a car to your address in 30 minutes. Cass looked down at her pajamas, then at her disaster of an apartment. "I'm in Chicago." "Yes, I know. The car will take you to a private airfield. Mr. Westfield's plane will bring you to New York. You'll be back in Chicago by this evening if you prefer. Or we can arrange accommodation if you'd like to stay." Cass sat down heavily on her couch. "He's sending a private plane to Chicago to bring me to New York for a meeting?" "Yes, Miss Monroe." Mr. Westfield was quite insistent. "He said it's important, and that he owes you an explanation and an apology in person." The flight the plane was ridiculous. Leather seats, a full kitchen, and more legroom than Cass had experienced in her entire life. She spent the flight alternating between reviewing the job termination, emails on her laptop, and staring out the window at clouds, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. When the plane landed at a private airfield outside New York, a sleek black car was waiting. The driver, an older gentleman named Thomas, made pleasant small talk about the weather as they drove into Manhattan. They didn't go to Westfield's office building. Instead, Thomas pulled up to a small cafe in Greenwich Village. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Nothing like what Cass expected from a billionaire. John was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood when she entered, and Cass noticed he looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I know I probably sound insane flying you here like this," a little Cass admitted, sitting down. "John, what's going on?" He slid one of the coffee cups toward her. "I spent last night thinking about what happened at the auction, about how you risked your career to stop me from making a massive mistake, about how every message I've seen online shows auction houses and collectors turning their backs on you for doing the right thing. That's the art world," Cass said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I knew the risks." "That's exactly my point. You knew the risks, and you did it anyway." John leaned forward. "Cass, the Westfield Foundation needs someone like you. Actually, I need someone like you." "What do you mean?" John pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal what looked like a job description. Director of Art Authentication and Acquisitions for the Westfield Foundation. You'd oversee all our collection purchases, authenticate existing pieces, and develop programs to promote ethical practices in the art world. Full staff, complete autonomy over authentication decisions, and a salary that's significantly more than you were making freelancing. Cass stared at the document. The salary figure made her eyes widen. "This is 3 times what I made last year. You're worth it." "John, I barely know you. You barely know me. This is crazy, is it?" John sat back in his chair. "Cass, I've been running my father's foundation for 8 months, and I'm drowning. The board thinks I'm too young, too inexperienced with art. They question every decision I make. Last night, I almost spent $5 million on a fake painting because I was trying so hard to honor my father's memory that I stopped thinking clearly." He ran a hand through his hair, and Cass saw genuine vulnerability in his expression. "You saved me from that mistake. But more than that, you showed me what the foundation actually needs. Not someone who's polite or political or worried about offending wealthy donors. Someone who cares about the art itself, about preserving real cultural heritage, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. This is because of last night, Cass said carefully. Because you said that thing about dinner, and now you feel obligated. This is despite last night, John corrected. Yes, I made a fool of myself with that dinner comment. Yes, I probably should have approached this more professionally. But Cass, I've known about your work for months. I've read your authentication reports. I've followed your career. When I saw you at that auction, I wanted to hire you before anything else happened. The dinner invitation was just me being an idiot who got caught up in the moment. Cass studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or pity. She'd learned to read people in her years of authentication work, spotting the tells of forgers and frauds. But John seemed sincere, almost desperate in his honesty. Your board is going to hate this, she said. Hiring the woman you publicly asked to dinner hours after meeting her. Probably, John admitted. But if you take this job, I want you to meet with them. Present your qualifications, your vision for the authentication program. Show them why you're the best person for this position, regardless of what happened at the auction. The decision cast spent the rest of the morning touring the Westfield Foundation headquarters, meeting staff members, and seeing the collection that would become her responsibility. It was impressive. 3 floors of carefully curated pieces spanning centuries, from Renaissance portraits to contemporary installations. But what struck her most was the lab space John showed her. State-of-the-art equipment for technical analysis. Reference libraries that most museums would envy, and workspace designed specifically for detailed authentication work. You already had this planned, she said, running her hand along a spectral analysis machine she'd only dreamed of using. This wasn't set up overnight. John nodded. I've been trying to expand the Foundation's authentication capabilities for months. The board keeps blocking the budget, saying it's unnecessary. But after last night, after watching you identify a forgery that fooled everyone else, I think I can finally convince them. They had lunch at the cafe, talking about art, authentication techniques, and their respective visions for preserving cultural heritage. Cass found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation with someone who genuinely understood why proper authentication mattered. Can I ask you something personal? John said as they finished eating. You can ask. I might not answer. Why art authentication? Most people with your credentials go into museum curation or academic research. The money's better, the prestige is higher. Why choose the harder path? Cass was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain. When I was 10, my grandmother took me to the Art Institute of Chicago. We stood in front of Sarah's a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Granja, shot for almost an hour. She explained how he made it, thousands of tiny dots of color. She said every authentic piece of art is like a conversation across time, the artist speaking directly to us through their work. She looked at John. Forgeries break that conversation. Their lies pretending to be truth. I became an authenticator because I wanted to protect those real conversations. To make sure that when someone stands in front of a painting, they're hearing the artist's actual voice, not some fraud's imitation. John was quiet for a long moment. My father would have loved you, he said finally. He used to say almost the exact same thing about why preserving art mattered. The board meeting 2 days later, Cass stood outside the Westfield Foundation boardroom, wearing a borrowed suit from John's assistant Rebecca and clutching her presentation materials like a lifeline. They're tough but fair, Rebecca whispered encouragingly. Just be yourself. You've got this. The boardroom was intimidating. 12 serious faces representing decades of experience and billions in collective wealth. At the head of the table sat Margaret Thornton, the board chair, a formidable woman in her 70s who'd been friends with John's father. Miss Monroe, Margaret said, her voice crisp. Thank you for joining us. We've all seen the news coverage from the auction. Before we discuss Mr. Westfield's proposal to hire you, I'd like to address something directly. Some members of this board are concerned that this position was created impulsively, motivated by personal rather than professional considerations. Cass had expected this. I understand your concern, Mrs. Thornton. If I were in your position, I'd have the same questions. That's why I'm here, to show you my qualifications independent of anything that happened at that auction. She spent the next hour presenting her credentials. Her vision for the authentication program, detailed financial projections, showing how proper authentication could save the foundation money while protecting its reputation, she addressed. Each board member's concerns with facts and research, never defensive, always professional. When she finished, the room was quiet. You mentioned in your presentation that you've identified authentication issues in several major institutions, said James Hamilton, the Foundation's legal counsel. Can you give us an example? Cass nodded. Last year, I was consulted by a private collector about a supposed Monet water lily painting. The provenance looked perfect. The attribution was from a respected dealer, and 2 other authenticators had already approved it.
Oh.
But something felt wrong. She pulled up images on the screen. I spent 6 weeks researching. The painting was real, but it wasn't by Monet. It was by his son, Michel. It's painted in his father's style after Claude's death. Still valuable, still beautiful, but not what it claimed to be. The collector could have sold it as a Monet and made millions. Instead, he chose to reattribute it correctly. That's the kind of integrity this foundation should represent. Margaret leaned forward. Miss Monroe, and you discover similar issues in our own collection? Then we deal with it honestly and transparently, Cass said firmly. The Westfield Foundation's reputation should be built on trust, not on hiding uncomfortable truths. The answer, after 3 hours of questions and deliberation, the board voted. When Margaret announced the unanimous approval, Cass felt tears of relief prick her eyes. John was waiting outside the boardroom, pacing like an expectant father. When he saw her face, he grinned. They said yes? Said yes? I start next month. He looked like he wanted to hug her but stopped himself, remembering they were in a professional setting. Cass, thank you. Thank you for taking this chance, for believing in what we're trying to do here. Thank you for offering me the opportunity. She paused. And John, about that dinner invitation. He looked suddenly nervous. Right, that. I know. I put you in an awkward position, and I understand if you'd rather keep things completely professional. Actually, Cass said, surprising herself, I was thinking we could do that dinner, but as friends, as colleagues getting to know each other. Not as a boss and employee, and definitely not with any cameras around. John's smile was brilliant. I like that a lot. As Cass left the foundation building that evening, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Saw you on the news. Very proud of you, honey. Also, is that young man single? Cass laughed and texted back. Mom, I just got hired. Let's take this one step at a time. But as she walked through the New York evening, surrounded by the city's energy and possibility, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that she'd made the right decision, that this new path would lead somewhere good. And maybe, just maybe, hope that the man who'd impulsively asked her to dinner at an auction might turn out to be someone worth knowing. 3 months later, the first snow of winter was falling on Manhattan as Cass stood in her new office at the Westfield Foundation, reviewing authentication reports with her small team. In 3 months, she'd proven every skeptic wrong. The collection revaluation had identified 12 pieces requiring new attributions, including one stunning discovery. A small sketch previously labeled as unknown artist turned out to be an early Picasso study worth nearly $3 million. The insurance savings alone had paid for her entire department's annual budget. But more than the financial success, Cass had built something she was proud of. Her authentication fellowship program had received applications from students at 30 universities. The Foundation's ethical guidelines for art acquisition were being adopted by other organizations, and the board that had once questioned her appointment now regularly sought her advice. What she hadn't figured out was her relationship with John. They'd had dinner that first week, a quiet meal at a small restaurant where they'd talked for hours about everything except work. Then another dinner the following week. Then coffee meetings that stretched into long afternoon walks through Central Park. They'd been to museums together, argued passionately about art theory, shared stories about their families and childhoods. But they'd maintained careful professional boundaries at the office. No one at the Foundation knew they were spending time together outside of work. It felt safe, this separation between her professional success and her growing feelings for John. Until today, when Margaret Thornton knocked on Cass's office door with news that changed everything. The gala. The Foundation's annual winter gala is in 2 weeks, Margaret said, settling into the chair across from Cass's desk. It's our biggest fundraising event of the year. 500 guests, major media coverage, and an opportunity to showcase the authentication program's successes. I've been working on the display pieces, Cass said, featuring some of the reattributed works with information about the authentication process. Excellent. There's one other matter. Margaret's expression was unreadable. John will need a date for the event. Foundation director, you'll be there as well, naturally. I'm bringing this up because several board members have noticed that you and John seem quite friendly. Cass felt her face heat. We've developed a good working relationship. I'm sure you have. Cass, I'm going to be direct with you because I like you and I respect the work you've done. If you and John are involved romantically, that's your business. But if you attend this gala together as a couple, it becomes public knowledge. Once that happens, some people will question whether your professional success has been influenced by your personal relationship. Even though I was hired before we started seeing each other socially, even though it's not fair, but it's reality. Margaret softened slightly. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just making sure you understand the implications. After Margaret left, Cass sat at her desk, staring out at the falling snow. She'd worked so hard to prove herself, to show that she deserved this position based on merit alone. The thought of people dismissing her achievements because of her relationship with John made her stomach turn, but she was also tired of hiding. Tired of pretending that John was just her colleague when he'd become so much more than that. Her phone buzzed with a text from John. Coffee break? I have something I want to discuss. The conversation they met at their usual cafe, the same place where John had first offered her the job. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that made Cass's heart clench. Margaret talked to you about the gala, he said. It wasn't a question. She mentioned it. John, we need to talk about what we're doing here, I know. He reached across the table and took her hand, right there in public for anyone to see. Cass, these past 3 months have been the best months of my life. Not just because the foundation is thriving, but because of you. Because every day I get to work with someone I admire, respect, and am completely falling for. Cass's breath caught. Falling for? Fine, have fallen for. Completely, hopelessly fallen for. John's smile was nervous, but determined. I love you, Cass. I've been wanting to say it for weeks, but I was waiting for the right moment. And I know this complicates everything. And I know the gala is going to make our relationship public, but I don't want to hide anymore. I want everyone to know that you're with me and I'm with you, and that has nothing to do with your professional achievements. Cass felt tears forming. I love you too, but John, I'm scared. I've worked my whole life to be taken seriously. If people think I only got this position because of you, then we'll prove them wrong. Together, John squeezed her hand. Cass, you've already proven yourself 10 times over. The board knows it, the staff knows it, and anyone who's seen your work knows it. The only people who will question your credentials are people who would have found some reason to doubt you anyway. He was right, Cass realized. There would always be doubters, people who couldn't accept that she'd earned her place through talent and hard work. Hiding her relationship with John wouldn't change that, okay, she said. We go to the gala together. We stop hiding, we deal with whatever comes. John's smile was radiant. Really, really. But John, I need you to promise me something. At work, we maintain professional boundaries. No special treatment, no favoritism. I need to know that my success at the foundation is based on my work, not on our relationship. I promise. Though technically, you're already succeeding independently. Last week's authentication report was brilliant, and you know I had nothing to do with that. Cass laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. True, I am pretty brilliant. The most brilliant, John agreed, then leaned across the table to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Meeting the family the week before the gala, John invited Cass to dinner at his mother's Upper East Side townhouse. Catherine Westfield was elegant and sharpered, clearly used to evaluating people who entered her son's life. Miss Monroe, Catherine said as they settled in the formal dining room. John tells me you've revolutionized the Foundation's authentication program. I've just implemented best practices that should have been standard already, Cass said honestly. Your husband built an incredible collection. I'm honored to help preserve his legacy. Catherine studied her for a long moment. My husband believed that art was humanity's memory, that every authentic piece was worth protecting, not for its monetary value, but for what it represented about human creativity and culture. I believe the same thing, Cass said. That's why authentication matters so much. We're not just verifying paintings. We're protecting those connections across time, making sure future generations can experience the real thing, not clever copies. Something in Catherine's expression softened. John said you'd understand. He also tells me you're attending the gala together, which means you're prepared for considerable media attention. We've discussed it, Cass said. Glancing at John, it's not ideal timing, but we're not willing to hide our relationship to avoid speculation, Catherine said firmly. My husband taught John that integrity matters more than public opinion. I'm glad he found someone who shares that value. She smiled. Welcome to the family, Cassandra. Please, call me Catherine. The gala night, the Metropolitan Museum was transformed for the event. Strings of lights turning the Great Hall into something magical. Carefully positioned spotlights highlighting the Foundation's most significant pieces. And enough champagne to float a small ship. Cass wore a midnight blue gown that Catherine had insisted on buying for her despite Cass's protests about the price. John wore a classic tuxedo, but the way he looked at her made her feel like she was wearing something priceless. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. As ready as I'll ever be for becoming tabloid fodder, Cass said with a nervous laugh. For what it's worth, you look absolutely stunning. They entered together. And while Cass saw cameras flash and heads turn, she also saw respect in many eyes. Over the past 3 months, she'd built relationships with museum curators, fellow authenticators, and collectors who valued her expertise. These people knew her work spoke for itself. Dr. Philip Ashford, the elderly expert who'd supported her at the auction, approached with a warm smile. Miss Monroe, Mr. Westfield, I must say this is a much more pleasant public appearance than your last one together. Cass laughed. Anything would be more pleasant than that disaster. Disaster. Philip raised an eyebrow. My dear, you prevented a significant fraud and launched a career move that's already improving authentication standards across New York. I'd call that a triumph. Throughout the evening, Cass presented the authentication program's findings to fascinated guests. She explained technical details to curious collectors, discussed ethical acquisition with museum directors, and watched as people genuinely engaged with the work she loved. John stayed close, but didn't hover, letting her shine in her own right. When he did speak to guests about the Foundation, he always emphasized Cass's contributions and expertise, making it clear that her success was independent of their relationship. The future late in the evening, they found a quiet corner near a Monet water lily painting. One of the authentic pieces Cass had verified in her first month, John said, slipping his arm around her waist. 3 months ago, I was drowning in responsibility, trying to honor my father's legacy while proving myself to a skeptical board. I felt like I was failing at everything, and now, Cass asked, leaning into his warmth. Now I have a foundation that's thriving, a board that trusts my decisions, and a brilliant woman who loves me despite my tendency to make impulsive declarations at art auctions. He turned to face her fully. Cass, I know we're taking this public tonight. I know there will be headlines and speculation and probably some unfair criticism. But I want you to know something. What? You didn't just save me from buying a fake painting that night. You saved me from a future of constantly second-guessing myself, trying to be someone I wasn't, of missing out on the best thing that's ever happened to me. You took a risk on me when you accepted this position, and you've proven every single day that you belong here. Not because of me, but because of you. Cass felt tears forming. John Westfield, are you getting sentimental at your own gala? Completely. Is it working? It's working, Cass admitted, kissing him softly. And John, thank you for taking a risk on me too. for seeing past the struggling freelancer to the person I could become with the right opportunity, for loving me not despite my stubbornness and principles, but because of them, as midnight approached and the gala wound down. Cass looked around at the museum filled with authentic art, genuine relationships, and real possibilities. 3 months ago, she'd been terrified that speaking up at an auction would end her career. Instead, it had launched her into a future she never could have imagined. "What are you thinking?" John asked, following her gaze. That my grandmother was right. Authentic art is like a conversation across time. And I think what we're building here, this foundation, this relationship, it's commitment to preserving truth. That's its own kind of conversation. One that will last long after we're gone. John pulled her closer. Then let's make sure it's a conversation worth having. As they left the museum together, snow falling gently on Manhattan's streets, Cass realized that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most beautiful outcomes. She'd risked her career to stop a fraud. John had risked his reputation to hire her and later to love her. Together, they were building something authentic, something real, something that would endure. And that, Cass thought as John hailed a cab to take them home through the snowy night, was worth more than any painting in the world. Epilogue 6 months later, the Westfield Foundation's Authentication Fellowship program graduated its first class of students. Cass stood before the group, sharing her own journey from struggling freelancer to foundation director, emphasizing that integrity and expertise would always matter more than connections or wealth in the audience. John watched his partner with undisguised pride. The board had just approved an expansion of the authentication program, citing its financial success and reputational benefits. More importantly, they'd done so based entirely on Cass's merit, on data and results that spoke for themselves. After the ceremony, as new authenticators, mingled with established experts, and everyone celebrated the foundation's commitment to preserving artistic truth, John took Cass's hand. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Home," Cass repeated, smiling at the word. She'd moved into John's penthouse 2 months ago, though she'd insisted on keeping her Chicago apartment, just in case. Some habits of independence died hard, but as they walked out of the foundation building together, partners in work and life, Cass realized she didn't need backup plans anymore. Sometimes when you took the right risks with the right person, the future stopped being scary and started being something to look forward to. "Hey, John," she said as they stepped into the evening air. "Yeah. Thank you for that terrible, inappropriate, completely impulsive dinner invitation at the auction. Turns out, it was exactly what we both needed." John laughed, the sound carrying into the New York evening. "Best mistake I ever made. Best risk I ever took," Cass agreed, and hand in hand, they headed home.